Good morning, everyone. I would like to welcome you to the March 20th, 2021 San Diego Fine Woodworkers Association Special Interest Group for CNC woodworking. And we're very happy that you joined us this morning. We're going to go over, we're going to be hearing from Rob Sandstrom, who is going to be talking to us about some of the choices he makes between doing VCarve work and 3D modeling. I think some of the things we talked that he has to show us with 3D modeling we'll probably go into in more depth in a subsequent session. And then we'll be joined by Pat Duffy, who's going to be talking to us about the advanced V-Carve features in Carbide Create and in other software. But then the need sometimes, if you don't have a BitSetter on your machine, he'll be explaining that, the need to split that code into multiple pieces, and a program he's found that allows him to do that. So that's a couple of things we're going to be talking about today. And so our first presenter is Rob Sandstrom. So Rob, I'm going to highlight your video, and if you go ahead and get started.
All right, I'll try to go to share screen here. Let's see. Host disabled participant screen sharing.
You know what? I checked it a minute ago to make sure it was available for everybody, and there we go. Okay, should be ready now.
All right. Okay, seems to have worked for now. So we will head over to the PowerPoint, and then I'll switch back and forth a couple times in the presentation, and we will see how that works. Can everybody?
Yes, we do see your PowerPoint.
See my PowerPoint now. So let's see if I can get to the controls for the PowerPoint right here. All right, so the purpose of this presentation is I've been doing a lot of different types of carving I've got a Laguna IQ, and I use vector software. I've been doing a lot of different types of carving, a lot of it for charity work, some for other things. But I've noticed some, I'll call it tips and tricks and thoughts that I thought the association may benefit from just having a dialogue on. If people hadn't been playing around with it much, just some things that people might be able to learn from talking about it. So I offered to share some of my findings with the group if they were interested in Ed. I thought that would be a good idea. I posted some on the San Diego forum. Here's a couple of examples of what I would call V-carving, both what I would call pocket techniques and raised techniques. If you look at the two on my left, I'm not sure where they're showing up on your screen, you can see that the carving is into the wood with the text and the designs, and a majority of it is up, raised, I would say. Whereas on the right side, the text is raised along with the designs, and the background is pocketed and carved in. Both have different uses, and people have different preferences on what they're looking at. So talk a little bit about how you get each of those. Somehow it skipped 2 slides on me. Well, I don't know what happened, but I have some 3D pictures also I wanted to share. I'll just flip over to those because I'm not sure what's going on with my presentation. So
You may have to minimize your presentation. We're not.
Yeah, I'm going to I'm just setting some things up to drag on the screen here. Just give me a second here. And I'll drag them over there. Okay, so versus what I would call 3D carving, which there's an example of where we got the marine emblem. And you saw that, right?
Yep.
And then the bald eagle head. And then the Flying Eagle. That's a thinner version and a thicker version. So that's what I call more formal, more recognized 3D carving, where you actually have a shape carved out of the wood that you're carving. So that I think we'll talk more about in a future presentation, but you have to decide what you're trying to do for your project and then go from there. So the methods for carving is, I just put down some thoughts about how you do it. The first method for carving, which gives you that first set of pictures, is a combination of V-carving in pocket tool paths. The second one would be where you import a 3D model that somebody else already created. The third is combining those two above for whatever thing you're trying to produce. And then the last, of course, is creating the model from scratch, which requires more extensive knowledge and use of Fusion 360, Aspire, or something else that actually gets into designing the 3D. I'm not going to talk anything close to that today. I'm more going to focus on number one with a little sprinkling of number two. The other thing to remember is carving isn't for the faint of heart, and the fact that it can be very time consuming depending on the details and what you want to carve. So you have to be prepared for that and have the patience to deal with that. So some V-carving thoughts I wanted to talk about are the key thing to be thinking about. One key thing is, what are you trying to accomplish? Will engraving or raised text and designs adequately get where you want to go? In most cases, that seems to be the case for a plaque or a banner or even an art piece. If not, then of course you have to move to the 3D style images. And although somewhat similar, they are totally different tool paths and totally different ways to approach setting up the job, along with the amount of time it takes. Although V-carving can actually take quite a while depending on the detail that you're trying to get out of the product. The next thing you want to think about is where's your current skill level, and don't take don't take the attitude that, hey, I can't do this because I don't know how to do it. What I suggest is that if you want to do something, there's a 90 to 95% chance that you can do just what you want to, because you've been working in wood for a long time and you started working with CNCs. It's just that you don't quite know how to do it. And I found that I try to be very tenacious at going out to YouTube and other sources, or even calling folks from the San Diego Woodworkers Association. You know, there's a few people that have quite a bit of CNC experience. Ones that pop to mind are Ian Martin and Lou Adzema and Howard Baum and Travis and others. So many of you guys have lots of experience and we can learn. We had a great presentation from Percy a while ago. So don't give up just because you're not sure that you got the right skill. Being tenacious can get you something that you'll feel real good about when you're done. The next thing when you're getting ready to do this is realize that depending on the details and information you want portrayed in your final product, you then have to inventory the available CNC capabilities and the bits that you have available, or what you might need to obtain. So when you start thinking about the design and you start learning how to put it all together, don't get frustrated. Either start to figure out how you might be able to use a different bit, or if that's not possible, how you might be able to obtain the bit in some other way over time. They're not cheap. They are expensive, but there are cheaper versions if you're just going to do limited runs and so forth. But CNC, the CNC, and more importantly, the bits are the bigger issue for most people, because when you start getting into detailed CNC work, it requires very steep angle bits, things like 18 degrees and so forth. We'll talk about that in a little bit.
I would like to ask, if you're not going to be asking a question or something, maybe you could mute. We do have a little bit of chatter in the background. Thank you. Go
All
ahead.
right.
I don't know, did you want?
Is that chat or a question? I'm trying to figure out. I can't tell. Okay, so moving on. I think the following different things are things to think about setting up your V-carving. I'm going to focus on V-carving right now. It is you can either create your own vectors, and I only do that for simple designs. So for creating your own vector, that would be one where you actually go in and you create it from scratch. I think everybody knows what I'm talking about, right? You put geometric type of symbols on there, you draw it out, or you would create it in some other kind of software, Inkscape or something else, and you develop the design of the vector you want. Or the other way is the concept of bit mapping. Is everybody familiar with the concept of bit mapping in the Vectric software or other softwares?
Let me turn that question around. Is there anybody here who does not know when we talk about bitmap tracing? Is there anybody here who does not know what that is? Speak up. Okay, so it sounds like most everybody
All right.
is familiar with that.
Good. So we'll move on then. The other way, and actually the way I've been leaning on some of my more detailed designs, is really I do a Google search for. I'll do a Google search for something that I want to actually look for. So let me give you a quick example. If I want to do like a sheriff's badge or something, I might put sheriff. I don't got to spell it right first, I guess. And I'll normally put SVG or something like that in it so that I know what I'm looking for. And I'll get a myriad of resources that come up. I think people can see this, right? So if I just, a common source is going to Etsy, and I'll buy a lot of them. And so what you can do is you can actually then go in and pick whatever design it is that you want to start with. And either that will be the full design you need, or you can start to then take that design and build off of it. And I've done both. So for example, if you were to go, let's see if I'm on the right account. If you were to go into my account, here's a California Highway Patrol badge. I was talking to somebody the other day and I imported this, and I'll use this later in the presentation, that I decided I thought we'd look at that and how that would work. The gentleman was working actually on a badge sign or something he was doing for a friend and wanted to get some ideas on how to go about doing it. So I imported this badge. I just bought it for $2.50. It's cheap. And then I went in and manipulated it around. We'll see what I did in a minute. Same thing with the U.S. Marine Corps emblem, which is a picture I'll show you. I think I might have shown you already. And remember the shark mascot I did when we did the multi-layer epoxy. Those were all just purchased files, which made it nice and easy for me to go in and manipulate those files. Now, the thing with those files is, one, I don't mind paying a couple bucks here and there for somebody that's put in hard energy and work to do it. I think that's appropriate. They're usually free to use in your product and sell whatever it is that you want to sell or keep, as long as you don't try to resell their vectors. You know, the agreement is the vector is their copyright, and you therefore cannot resell their vector and make money from the work that they did in that way. But you can usually sell the product that you created from the vector. All right. So once you've actually purchased the vectors, the next thing you need to do is you need to review the vectors that you created or imported. And one method is through Vectric tools in the software. So let me go and switch screens for a second. If I think I have to stop share first and then reshare. All right, can you see the Vectric software?
Yes.
Not? All right. So here's an example. Remember I told you about the California Highway Patrol that I took into place? All right, so this is one that I just purchased a couple days ago. and walking a gentleman through a V-carving that he was interested in learning a little bit more about. And so as you can see, I purchased it. And then the way I brought it into the project is if you look up at this button, it says import vectors from a file into a job. Can everybody see that?
Yes.
All right. All I did was open that, and I went to my file and I picked the vector. I opened it up and I dropped it in my file. Can you see that?
Yes.
All right. So it was that simple. Now, the next thing you need to do is try to figure out how you want to carve this and how it is going to carve when you set it up. So the next thing you do is you want to kind of check it out and see if there's any errors or anything that's going to create a problem for you carving. And there's a couple ways to do that, but let me just show you that indeed there is an error, but most of the time they come in, even if there's an error for V-carving, you can still carve it without a problem. So this is a method. This is one of the tool paths I set up ahead of time. We'll talk through that in a second. So don't worry about looking at the tool path right now. But when I go to calculate this tool path, you'll see I get an error message. It says continue anyway or go to vector validator. And being a little on the OCD side, I can't stand that there's an error there. But I'm going to say continue anyway in this case, and I'm not going to go to the validator and try to fix those errors, okay? So this is what you typically, if you're in a hurry, you do this right away, continue anyway. So it says, okay, I don't care about the errors yet, not unless they impact the carving. And it even said it may or may not impact your carving results. So when I do that and I take a look at my toolpath, which I'd already set up, and I carve it and I preview my toolpath, and I'm going to hit preview visible. Let's go over the sections up here if you're not familiar. You got the following sections when you preview your toolpath. You can preview the selected toolpath. That's the one that's in blue. You can preview all toolpaths. Well, I wouldn't want to do that because I got two different types of toolpaths set up here. And now we'll just carve everything that's in this list. The other one is preview visible toolpaths. And what that does is it previews whatever you've got checked in this checkbox. So that's what those selections mean. I used to always do reset preview and it preview selected, and it would throw me off because I'd have the wrong one highlighted. And when I was working with Shane, those of you guys that know Shane, he always did this one. So we were talking past each other, and I finally realized what he was doing. And this was a much better selection for taking a group of toolpaths for a final product if you wanted to. So I typically hit preview visible toolpath, and we'll do that. And I like to give my toolpaths a color. Does everybody know how to do that? For a toolpath, you highlight it. If you go up to machine area color and you select toolpath color, you can color it whatever color you want. You can color it black. You could color it green. You can color it whatever color you want. I typically use black unless I'm using multicolors. And it shows you what the carved result is going to be. So you see, if you look at this, even though it had errors, does anybody have a big problem with the way that carved? I don't think so, right?
No.
So you could move forward and you don't have to spend hours sitting there trying to figure out what's wrong with it. Unless, of course, you've got a problem like I do that you just can't stand that there's an error in something. So it doesn't make a difference. You know, close enough is close enough, but different people have different personalities. So that's one example. The other example, I'm going to go back to the 2D view here, is if you really wanted to go check for errors, there's a couple ways you can do that. One is you can come over here and vector validator. You see that little check mark under edit objects? I selected all of the vectors. If I hit that, then, and I search selected, it's going to go through and it's going to highlight where all these little errors are before you even start carving. So far, everybody with me?
Yes.
Just
Sir.
shake your heads. I can see your screen. All right. All right. So if you wanted to do that, then you could go through here and then start to clean these up. So you see, I am zooming in bigger and bigger on each of these errors. And so you can see that the plus sign means intersection. Can everybody see how this intersects here and goes across and intersects there and intersects back over here?
Yes.
Yep.
All right. So that's the problem with this vector. And so if you really want it clean, you could clean that up. But in the type of carving I'm doing, it probably won't make a difference. But just so we get a kick out of it and we can see it, I can go ahead and clean that vector up in a couple different ways. The easiest way is to come over here. You see these scissors? Right here, it says trim.
Yes.
All right. And then make sure your rejoin trim sections are automatically after you with it checked. So then you can come over with the scissors. And if I clip those parts, oh, I went too far, go reverse, Control Z, or hit backwards. Oh, did it again. I may have to break that vector. Right here. And I don't want to get into details, but you would go into node edit here, and then you could cut the vector right here and cut this part out and then rejoin it. Does everybody follow that idea?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So I won't spend a lot more time on that. But anyway, you'd go through there and you would then clean up the vectors. I'm going to go out of here so I don't mess up what else I have set up. So that's the first thing is you review the vectors and you clean them up. And then you decide, will the design that you have, will what you have as vectors do what you want to relative, and then you have to set up the next thing you want to do is then set up the actual flow paths for the tools. And that's where you can get the different designs of whether it's carving in or out of what you're trying to do. So the first thing is, let me give you a real quick example. I'm going to show you these two different tool paths. So the first one you guys already saw. You saw this one, remember? Where I carved it so that the letters are carving into the wood and the details are carving into the wood. And the most of the carving is at the surface of the wood. So you if you wanted to paint it or something, what you'd do is you'd either mask this off before you carved it with some Oracal or some other thing, or you would you could spray it all with shellac or something that's going to make it so the wood's not as porous, so that it's easier to sand afterwards. And then you could go ahead and carve it, or you could do that after you carve it. And then you could spray paint it or use milk paint or something, however you like to do it, stain or whatever, and paint everything black and then sand off the highest parts. And it works fairly effective. It just takes a little bit of work. And you would end up with this dark carved in section with the upper part all being the color of the wood, right? Does that make sense to everybody? Yep. So that's one way. The other way that that some people find more attractive and like is this way where you actually carve, I would call it you carve it, pocket it in, and the letters and other things are raised. I'm going to hit reset preview here, and we're going to preview what that looks like. And you can see it going through the tool path down here in the bottom of my screen. Now, this will take a lot longer to carve because you're carving out a lot more material, right? And then as you see, what's left raised is the design along with the lettering, and everything else, it's all popped out of a pocket. Can everybody see that?
Yes.
So depending on what you want to do, you have to set up your tool paths and your vectors to do that. So one of the key things that was fun to learn was I thought, well, this is going to be tough. What I found out was, maybe most of you know that. Do you know what the difference is between those two results? Anybody? Well, the key difference is one line. You see this line right here that I just highlighted? I added that. And so if you go to the first tool path, and I hit edit, if you want that to occur, then you go on this line, you go everything in there. And that's going to give you that raised version, the first version I showed you. If you want the pocketed version, you see how I took that last line out? Can everybody see that on their screen?
Yeah, it's not
Yeah.
select.
So that was the one difference that made it how that thing carved or didn't carve. All right. So recognizing that what a V-Carve does is a V-Carve looks for areas that are basically pockets that you want carved out. So it's going to select wherever the pockets are. So in the first case, since I was starting here, working from the outside in, the first thing it sees is a pocket. In the second case, I mean, in the first case, because I highlighted this outer line, the first thing it sees is a pocket, and then it tries to make everything sequence from that point. Does that make sense, kind of? So the bottom line is, it's usually just one or a few vectors different, and then depending on what you want to do with your design, you can add those or subtract those. For example, if I wanted to do something different with this, so the highway patrol was in versus out, what I'd probably do is go ahead and do some kind of offset vector here. And I'd add another vector, let's say inwards 0.05 inches. And now I've added another vector, and it's going to carve this section different because it's going to carve this like it's a pocket, but it's not going to carve this like it's a pocket. Does that make sense to everybody? So that's how you've got to kind of manipulate these. Let me hit Control Z so I don't screw up my project. That's how you got to see if things aren't carving the way you want to. Go look and see how the vectors are set up where you're carving. And you don't have to look at everything. Just look at the section that doesn't look like it's carving right and figure out, do you need to put some more vectors around it? How do you want it? What do you want it to look like? So that's the first one, is making sure the vectors are set up so that when you set up the tool paths, whatever they are, you'll get the desired results. The next thing to think about is what size bits do you need? I have bits anywhere from, if you go into the toolpath that I created here, you'll see that I'm using 30-degree bits. That's because the detail inside of these emblems and so forth, especially these little stars, require a significant amount of detail in the bit. If I was making a great big plaque and these stars were bigger, I could use a 60-degree, 90-degree bit. You know, most of us, if we're making big signs, that's what we think of, because when we first take classes, we're talking about 60 and 90-degree bits. But if you're trying to get into detailed work, it's likely you're going to need some smaller bits. And I have bits anywhere from, for example, if you can see my picture, I don't know. Can you see my picture too, or just a screen?
Yes, we can if we look over at the.
Okay, just look at the little picture. You see this bit? That's a 30-degree V bit, very small. I have another V bit here that is a 15-degree. I won't take your time to go through all those, but it's even smaller than that 18-degree V bit. So depending on the detail of work that I'm doing, I pick the bit that seems to be the best for that without going too small, because the smaller your bit, the more times it's going to have to pass and the longer it's going to take. But you can't get detail out of a 90-degree V bit like this. Does that make sense to everybody? I think so.
Yes, it does, Rob. And what I'm going to ask you to do is, we're at about the half-hour mark. So
all right, so I'll wrap it up here. If
you could kind of wrap it up in the next little bit, then we'll turn it over to Pat.
Sounds terrific. All right, so going back now to my other screen, my presentation, so it'll help keep me on track and not have me wander all over this. I could easily wander into this software way too much, guys. There's a lot to it. So can you see my?
Yes, sir.
Screen now? Okay, so basically the bit selection. If anybody wants this presentation, I'll give it to Ed and he can post it with this. Setting up the bit start depth, that's a key. Do you start it at the 0 point or do you start it down lower? Do you put a flat depth in it or not? those all make different effects on the carving that you're doing. The guy I was talking to hadn't even realized that setting the start depth could make it so that you might actually get some carving that looks like it's not going to carve. All right. So the setting of the start depth, most people think about that, trying to set that in a lower place when you're just doing inside a pocket. You can actually use it as a way for something that would normally carve very lightly to being being deeper at the start with a smaller bit. Did that make sense? The profile cut, you'll want to make a good profile cut if you're going to hold the model by itself. And I typically make those with the smallest bit as makes sense so I can get a clean cut. Also, the key is I typically don't put tabs in at first so I can see what it's going to look like and take away the waste. And then I put tabs in afterwards. Preview your tool path. What you see is what you get most of the time. Some people don't trust it. I've found that the software is very reliable at telling me what I'm going to get, including little pock marks and divots and stuff. And if that's happening, go back to the drawing board and figure out what you have wrong in your settings that you might conflict with. So preview that tool path, and that'll help you in the long run. Of course, sanding and finishing, I'm not going to spend any real time on. That's an art all into itself. People much better at that than I am. I've used sanding mops, sponges. Well, actually, I don't have a sanding mop. I want to get one. They're kind of pricey. A Dremel tools and other detailed sanding techniques. The one thing I will caution is when you have models like that, not the V-Carve models quite as much, but when you have models like that Eagle and stuff that I showed you, they are gentle. It's easy to bust the wings off and do other things. And as I said, carving isn't for the faint of heart. That Eagle, for example, takes me 12 hours to carve. So if you bust that up, and I've got one that I busted up already. The bit didn't set right overnight. I had a burp in power or something like that. I came in and I cut right into the Eagle. So I just wasted 12 hours worth of carving work. Made me want to cry. I've got it as a plaque and a memento hung in my garage to don't do this again. Sanding, and be careful you don't ruin all the hard work you just put into it. And maybe there could be a class by somebody that's a much better finisher than I am in the future on how to sand your carvings. That might be interesting to some of us. All right.
If we can find somebody who has perfected that skill, yes.
Yeah. Next time, we're not going to talk about it now, but the next time, let's talk about importing 3D models. I've learned a thing or two. The process of finding them is similar to what I talked about before: Google search, Etsy, etc. Then we can talk about how to import that actually into the software. I'm still kind of new at that and learning things every day. And after importing it, how to manipulate that model in a way that allows you to get the best carving, and setting up the tool pass. Setting up the tool pass is a real art in the 3D carving world, because it can make a difference between a 3-hour carve and a 20-hour or 30-hour carve with similar results, with little tips and tricks that you can do in there. And I'm just picking those up, but it would be worth spending some time. Maybe someone has more experience than me in that, but I've learned quite a bit over the last couple months because I've been doing more and more of these models. And I've been researching the internet. There's a few good sources out there. With that, I will wrap this up. Any questions? Okay, I think we'll pass it on to the next person. I'll stop sharing.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate that. And we're going to, at this point then, well, first of all, let me just say, really appreciate that, Rob, and looking forward to talking more about the 3D models in a subsequent visit. And we'll talk more about scheduling that. Rob has been using Aspire and the Vectric software for his work. And we also, a lot of us have access to the Carbide Create, which came with the Shapeoko machines as free software. And so Pat Duffy is going to be talking a little bit about some similar things here, which is doing VCarve with the advanced VCarve feature on Carbide Create, which also allows you to do V-carving in pockets like what Rob has been showing us. But if you're like some of us and like the shop and your CNC machine does not have a BitSetter that allows you to change tools from one part of the job to the next and get that same depth, then he's going to talk to us about an option that we have that allows us to split that code. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Pat, and let me spotlight you, and you can go ahead and get started.
Holy cow, do I look terrible? Oh,
You
man.
look wonderful.
Thank you, Ed. We were teaching a class a couple of weeks ago. I'm going to give a little prelude to this in Carbide Create, and Carbide Create just came out recently with a advanced VCarve. They've always had VCarve, but they've never had advanced VCarve, which is quite similar to the standard VCarve that we find in Vectric's VCarve program. So I've got too many VCarves in here and I'm going to get lost. But the issue that we have is without the BitSetter sitting on the either of the Shipoko machines, if you use the advanced VCarve within Carbide Create, you actually start endangering both the equipment and yourself, maybe not for yourself, but quite possibly for the follow-up people. So what we need to, the issue is that Carbide Create creates a single Gcode file. It's a .nc file, but it's single Gcode file for all the bits that are contained within the advanced VCarve tool path. So for example, if you're using a 1/8" clearing bit and a 60-degree V bit in the same tool path, then they are going to be dumped out into a single Gcode file or a single .nc file. And without some way of splitting those two apart, they're not going to function properly within the Shipoko machine itself. So let me put something up on the screen here, if I might, and we'll see what happens if I can figure out where it's at. And if I can go to slideshow, and that's the last slide. So let me go up to the first slide. Okay. So the again, we don't have a BitSetter on either of the machines that is functioning. And I have to caution, we do have a BitSetter, but it's hidden in the back on the small Shipoko 3. Carbide Create, the advanced VCarve, not the regular VCarve, but the advanced VCarve in Carbide Create will allow you to have up to 2 bits in that tool path. The first bit has to be an end mill, a square end mill. I haven't ever tried a ball nose, but it cannot be a V bit. The second tool has to be a V bit. That's the way they designed the program. You can't change those two around. So you have the option of a second tool in VCarve. And if you do have 2 tools, the second tool has to be a V bit. And the result when you—
I pause you there for just a second, Pat.
Yeah.
I would like to ask a general question, because what you're trying to accomplish here, of course, is a VCarve pattern within a pocket.
Right.
What advanced VCarve is doing. Is there anybody in the meeting who does not understand why you would want to do that? If there is, then maybe Pat could explain a little bit about that.
Well, let me go into the next slide, and I think the next 2 slides are going to kind of clarify that point.
Okay. Excellent.
And one of them has the slides that I have to do with inlay. So if you want to do an inlay in Carbide Create, this is about the only way you can do it on our machines currently. The issue is, yeah, there was no way under VCarve, under Carbide Create, to actually create the inlay portion easily. You could, but it would take you hours of computation to figure out how to do it.
Excellent.
So let's see. So the rule is it will Carbide Create can create a single G-code file, and there's multiple ways of doing it, just not in VCarve Advanced or Advanced VCarve, but there's ways of making a single G-code file or a .nc file in Carbide Create's area that have 2 or more bits in it. And once you have a single G-code file with 2 or more bits, it's not conducive in our machine, the way it's set up now, to keep them in a single file. So somebody in their infinite wisdom and understanding came up with a way to split the bits. So this is, if we're going to create an inlay, as we just presented, the first thing you're going to do is create, I'll call it the male side of the, or I'm sorry, the female side of the artwork. And this is where you're going to use just a single V bit, and it's going to look something similar to this when you get done. And all of those are just straight single V bits running around and having fun and cutting it out. So this will create a single file, or a .nc file with a single bit in it. And that's all, that's just standard for whatever else we do. Going to the next side though, we need to get the inlay portion, and that's going to be, obviously, if anybody's ever tried this, it's the exact reverse. You flip it horizontally and everything seems to turn out okay if you're lucky. And it will turn out something similar to this. And if you see everything now, it's actually lifted. And when you marry the 2 pieces together, glue them up, resaw them out, sand them down, polish them up, they look pretty good. But the problem is with this guy, we're actually using 2 bits. One is to clear out the pocket, and that's an 1/8 inch end mill. And the other one is a 60-degree V bit, and it's going to be doing all the detail work where the 1/8 inch end mill won't get to. Right in here in these little areas where it's dark blue, generally speaking. Also, it's going to put a bevel around the edge of this one on the outside on here. And it's also going to put a bevel on the outside of this vector here. So we'll have a bevel on the inside of this vector, a bevel on the outside of this vector. And after everything is beveled out, all the lettering is also beveled. After everything is beveled out, it should insert into the opposite side for a glue up. The problem is with this one, it produces a single G-code file, and the G-code file will have both the 1/8 inch end mill and the 60-degree V bit. This does not occur in Vectrix V-Carve. This only occurs over here in Carbide Create. So don't get the 2 confused when we're dealing with this. So the problem is you have two bits sitting in a single G-code file, and you've got to figure out how to split them. And I don't know if anybody's ever looked at your G-code files to see how extremely simple they are to figure out. But they're long and detailed, and you have to have the right lines of code in the right places if you're going to try to split it yourself. And some of the lines of code have to be duplicated from the top of the file to the middle of the file. So in somebody's infinite wisdom and understanding, they came up with a little app. It's online called the Gcode Splitter. And what you'll end up doing is you start with, I started over here with a, right here, there was the Gcode for the 2-bit inlay. That's what was created when I asked to create the Gcode. I'm going to go back up and show you where that was found. That was right here. When I created that, I renamed it on the creation to the 2-bit inlay. So this is sitting in my computer, and wherever the directory is that I put this stuff in is going to be sitting there. If I go up online to this place called something or other, I'm not even going to give you the address. I'll tell you how to find it. But you go up there, you bring this program up, and it asks you to choose a file. And I would click on here, choose this file, and immediately, I mean, you don't even let your finger off the pad when you do this. Immediately, you get these 2 downloadable files. Both of them are .nc files. Both of them are Gcode files, but one of them deals with the 102-bit, which I believe is the 1/8" end mill, and the other one is the 302-bit, which is the V-bit, 60-degree V-bit. All you need to do is click on these 2, and they will download to the bottom of your screen here. Then all you need to do is save them off someplace, and generally speaking, it will probably be back in the same directory down here, but you'll save them back. They'll go to a download folder first, and then you have to copy them back. And that's the split. It's as simple as that. It's a very easy process to do. Again, you start with the .nc file, and I specify it has to be a .nc file. It won't work with a .gcode file that VCarve is going to give you. It has to be a .nc file. So you'll start with the .nc file. You'll run it through this process based on this choose file option here. It will download to this location here, and they will then exist in your download folder. Once they're there, you can copy them back into whichever folder you want, and then they will run as independent tool, Gcode tool files. So it only applies to Carbide Create, and I've tried running it against trying to force it against a .gcode file, and he will not accept a .gcode file. It will only run against Carbide Create. He has a pretty good write-up here on what's happening. I always select move spindle to 0, at the end of cut, so it brings it back to wherever you've given your X0, Y0, and that's just ease of bit change there. However, when you're sitting on the Shapeoko, when you say resume at the end of the bit cut, it's going to go to the back end of the table anyway. So I guess this is kind of a superfluous option.
Okay.
Just quick and dirty. Does anybody have any questions? Does it make sense why we're doing this, I guess, is the question.
Yeah, let me, first of all, let me just say thank you, Pat, for explaining that, for bringing that to our attention, because that's going to be very useful for, I think, a number of us. But let me throw the floor open for anybody who has any questions for either Pat or Rob on what they've talked about today. Go ahead and speak up. And perhaps, Pat, you can stop sharing your screen.
Okay.
We'll,
I'm sorry.
Yeah, you can bring it back up if you need to answer a question, but we'll let people go ahead and we'll throw the floor open for questions. Anybody? Don't be shy. Okay, so maybe there aren't questions. Let me ask you, we've got a few minutes left. Let me ask you all, if you've had experience on other machines and other software doing these kinds of advanced V-carving in, combining V-carves and pockets. Has anybody else done anything with that? Okay, perhaps not. Okay, I'm going to go ahead then, and unless somebody has something they would like to contribute, I'll go ahead and end the recording.